Okay, well, I think we can kick things off. Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Tran. I am the Director of Marketing here at Gimmal. And for those who are just trickling in, we are recording the session. And so you will be getting this as we finish up the webinar and we follow up with everybody post-webinar. So thank you again for joining. Today's topic is something that we've seen, oh my gosh, trending across industry, obviously top of mind for many folks. And the challenge is a lot of folks don't know where to start. And Jeff, my colleague Jeff here, we will be introducing ourselves and what we do here at Gimmal and more broadly, but a lot of things that we hear from customers is, how do I get started? Where do I even look for PII, and how do I get started on a process that actually works? So without further ado, let's dive in. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Again, feel free to, again, engage with us, ask questions as we go, as they come up in the chat. We will try our best to monitor in real time, but just know that we will have dedicated time at the end for both Jeff and I to answer any questions or any feedback you might have towards the end of the webinar. And again, as mentioned, this webinar will be recorded and we will send it out to everybody who registered. So if you need to drop off for any reason, no worries there. And then if you run into technical issues, please just let us know. And typically, this is something that I experience with IT a lot here, but usually a reset, logging back in, logging back off will usually do the trick. But we will be here. And again, we look forward to diving in. So just a quick, high level of who we are. If this is your first Gimmal webinar, we are the market's only end-to-end information governance platform, everything from discovery all the way down to analyzing those files, classifying those files, and managing them, and really across the information lifecycle. So again, my name is Kim Tran, Director of Marketing here at Gimmal. I have come from a number of industries now. I started off my career thinking I wanted to become a lawyer and worked in First Amendment and media litigation many, many years ago, and pivoted into marketing and branding. And most recently, I was at Capital One in financial services. And so this topic is very near and dear to me because while I did not manage PII directly, I worked with many stakeholders who worried about PII. And so in a way, I was just as responsible for PII as well. And so I'll hand it over to Jeff to introduce himself here.
Thanks, Kim. My name is Jeff Tujetsch, and I'm a solutions architect here at Gimmal. I actually started out going history. I started out as a computer programmer in COBOL, so I'm showing my age a little bit here. But in 2000, we founded a company called Sherpa Software. I was one of the original founders, and we were acquired in May of 2021 by Gimmal. And I am now a solutions architect and doing sales engineer, demo, webinars, what have you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So on today's webinar, again, we are trying to keep it very high level, and we will be talking about this topic more in upcoming webinars. And so please feel free to follow our LinkedIn page where we post a lot of different updates. Check out our blog on our website, www.gimmal.com. Or Jeff and I will also have our contact information at the end of today's webinar. So please feel free to reach out and ask for more information or book a demo with us. So at a high level on today's agenda, we'll talk about what even makes up PII. A lot of people tend to focus on just one type or very specific PII, but as Jeff will educate us today, and certainly myself, there are PII that you may not have even considered. And then, of course, the types of unstructured data and where they're located. As you all know, we can't protect what we can't see. And so things that, you may not be thinking about or other folks in your organization may not be thinking about, that we will talk about today. And then how to search for that data. Of course, manually is, contains a lot of human errors, takes a lot of time, resources, and quite frankly, who has the time and energy to do that? And so different considerations that Jeff will be walking us through today. And then of course, once you search and find that data, how to classify it, govern it, and ultimately protect and manage it. So before we jump in, I'm just curious, as I mentioned, I came from the financial services world, I came from tech, and most recently also higher ed tech. And so PII was something that we certainly had to worry about as employees. But also, I'm just curious, do you manage personally identifiable information for your organization? And so we will be launching a poll here in a couple of minutes, and just curious as to your role and your scope in your organization. So I'm seeing a couple people responding here. We will be sharing the results in a little bit. Let me see here. Okay, so there's a lot of traction. Any guesses? Drop your guesses in the chat. Okay, so things are up there. Okay, I see one more straggler, and okay, it's pretty divided. So just about almost half of you occasionally manage PII for your organization. And as a quick follow, 37% of you all do manage it, I would assume directly. And so as you know, some of you, the small percentage of you who say you don't manage, you may be just like me, part of an organization, but still being cognizant and being responsible for the indirect PII that you may or may not encounter. So thank you for sharing. And so as a quick follow to that question, I'm also curious if for those who answered yes and or occasionally to this question, do you believe that your organization has suffered a data breach in the last 12 months? And I'm also curious, feel free to share the industry that you are from as well. My guess or assumption or prediction would be that some industries are more prone to data breaches. And this is why, not so much in my most recent experience, but in the past, in certain industries, we've had certainly known and unknown data breaches as well. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of movement here. Okay. Okay, so results are pretty interesting. About almost half of you said no, and but most of you said yes or not sure. And I think that unless you work for a company that publishes these data breaches or ends up in the PR news, for example, about a data breach, obviously as an organization and as employees and custodians of PII, we want to prevent that. And so that's why we are here today. And without further ado, I will keep going and click out of this poll. Okay, well, so the reason why I asked about those poll questions and I was curious about it is because based on a most recent survey from Osterman Research, and we will share that white paper with you all at the end of today's webinar. But according to the survey for very many US organizations, more than half have experienced data breaches, and more than half of those data breaches have involved at least one type of personal data. And so this is why today's webinar will really dive into the different types that you may not be thinking about. Everything from employees to customers, but also sensitive or confidential information that, again, you may not know that you have in these unknown sources. And so I'll pass it over to Jeff here for the rest of the time today, but we can kick off with the very first question. What makes up PII?
Okay, so as Kim said, we're going to talk about what PII is, where it's possibly located, and once we find it, what can we do with it? Before we do that, let's talk about the two different categories of PII. So I just want to make sure everybody aware of that. First, we have indirect, which is basically identifying a group of people, such as the 4 examples you see here. But the one we're going to focus on is direct. And the top 2 that you see here are the ones that I am hearing about most often when I'm doing demos or helping prospects, clients with information, is social security numbers and credit card numbers. Those are the things that people are most focused on. But there's other type of data. There's email and mailing address, internet IP address. So just to give you some insight, social security number, that is very obviously very, very specific to the United States. If you're dealing with, your organization has anybody outside of the US that you're working with, obviously you need to be aware of that PII. For instance, the UK has a national insurance number. Canada has the social insurance number. There are actually 10 other countries with social security numbers, not in our format, but they have them available. 41 countries use a national identification number and 27 use a tax identification number. So just be aware that it's not just US-based information that you need to be concerned about regarding PII. So I don't know about you guys, but when I get email or when I get, or anything that's printed, I get USPS mail, I get boxes from my online shopping, I destroy my mailing address. I make sure that I shred that, I cut it out of the box, whatever I have to do to not have that information shared. Well, I think it's incumbent upon all organizations to be as concerned about that as I am individually about mine. So that's where we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So I want you to consider other types of PII that's out there. And I'm going to put these into 2 categories. We have ones that can identify you personally and other ones that can identify your household. To me, both are still very things, something I want to actually manage properly. So things like driver's license and your military Medicare IDs and your passport number, those are specific to you. But license plate, your phone number, your postal code, especially when there's the 9-digit US postal code, and the VIN number, the vehicle identification number, those are identifying your home, which to me is just as much of an issue as it is having that personal one. So if you think about all this, it's a little bit frightening, quite honestly, to see all the ways that each one of us is uniquely identified. So that's why it's so important to protect this information. Next slide, please. So we broke it down into 3 different places where your PI could exist: within chats, and you'll see the different versions of that, files and messages. But I'm going to actually make files be the common denominator here, because in a chat, you can attach a file. In a message, you can attach a file. So if that PII is in a file, you can't just depend on it being in a file location. Email and chat is also another place where that data could live. So you need to be cognizant of that as well. Next slide. Okay, it's the poll question we brought up. We're showing here the different types of unstructured data. So this is a rhetorical question, but how many of these does your company have? And do you think there's PII in any of those? And if so, as we saw on the poll question, do you currently have a plan to discover what's in your unstructured data? So I like to call this shining a light on your dark data, to be able to uncover what's actually out there, to be able to have an understanding of that. Because, you know, let's be honest, humans are typically pack rats. We're going to store stuff out there and we're never going to use it again. So just be wary of that. I know I'm guilty of that. I go onto a file share, I'm going to put a file out there and I'm never going to think about it again. If that has PII in it, then that could be a problem, of course. So next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the ways that we can locate that PII. So 2 boxes. First is keywords, phrases, and search expressions. So keywords and phrases are just basically looking for a list of values. And the main difference between a keyword and a phrase is a phrase would have an embedded space. So like if I'm looking for my name specifically, I would need to put that in double quotes because I'm looking for the phrase Jeff Tujetsch, as opposed to a keyword would just be a word without any spaces. Search expressions, that's a whole nother level of complexity, but also power. And we're going to be showing that in a bit here. But that is one way that you can look for your data, is doing things that are based upon human nature, some things that you'd be able to look at for phrases and keywords. Like if we wanted to look for the word social security number, then we'd be able to do that with a keyword and phrase. Because that could be a way that you actually locate that data, is based upon looking for those keywords, not just the actual value, but the keywords themselves. I do see keywords being used most often in phrases as well, but there are a lot of companies also doing the regex as well as the search expressions. So what is regex? Regex is actually the ability to identify a pattern. So, and I'm actually going to be showing you examples in some other slides coming up here, but basically what it means is that we can go out and find a social security number based upon the 9-digit numeric value, typically with a delimiter in between the 3 components of the social. So that's what regex can do for you. It can help you find those pattern-based values, which a lot of PII is. So we can looking for, maybe you're looking for a particular email domain, or you're looking for a particular, once again, a keyword or phrase, or you're looking for a value with a regular expression. Any of those is going to help you with the PII. And they don't have to work independently of each other. These two can work together. And I'll show you that as we're coming up. Next slide, please. Okay, so keywords and phrases, once again, that's pretty simple. That's just a list of words and phrases that we see. If you want to get into search expressions, now these operators come into play. And these operators are very powerful, because basically what they do is they allow you to combine search phrases and keywords together, but put criteria around them to decide, in essence, make sure that this expression is true. So and or, pretty self-explanatory. Not as pretty powerful, because what that does for you is it allows you to say, I want this word, but if it also has this word, I don't want to consider it a match. So that's something you can use to your power. Parentheses, we're going back to math class. So this is doing the order of evaluation, or order of operation of a mathematical equation, same kind of thing here. So we're allowed to put parentheses around these values to say, I want to make sure this happens and this happens, but have the evaluation happen for the parentheses values first. The like values, what that does for you is it allows you to use a wildcard. You see here in the example of contract. So what that means is that that asterisk can represent multiple characters. So in this example, we would find a match on any file or email that had the CONTRACT as the first 8 characters of the word. So all the permutations of that would then be found as a legitimate match. Then we have near. So what near means is, you'll see here, technology near a conference, meaning it has to be within a certain number of words between the 2 words to make sure that they have a relationship. So if we're looking for social near security, that could be something that you do. Instead of just looking for social or security, you could be doing a nearest to make sure those words are close to each other. And then lastly, exclude, which allows you to say, I want to make sure that this word is not within a certain number of words of another word. So just the opposite of doing the near to allow you to use this. So take these values and leverage them as much as you can. So for instance, if you're doing a keyword expression, maybe what we be doing is looking for the word social, looking for the word security, looking for SSN. All of those are valid. So maybe we'd be using the or to do that. We might even use the like to be able to look for the word social or security, any permutations of that. So just some things to think of. So hopefully the software that you're using, and I hope you are using software, not doing this manually, the software that you're using gives you the ability to test. And what I mean by test is, we want to test for 2 things. We want to test for the validity of the search expression, and we want to test for the accuracy of the search expression. The validity is to make sure it's really a valid expression, meaning that if we're using parentheses and we have a left parenthesis and no right parenthesis, that is an invalid expression. When you do your search, it is not going to work. So if the software that you're using doesn't give you the ability to do that, or does not qualify the expression or validate it upon saving it, then you could be watching hours or days go by just to find out at the end that you had an invalid search expression and that time was wasted. So that's the validity part of it. The accuracy part is going to be when you actually making sure that your search expression is finding what you want it to find. So what I mean by that is going out and testing that expression on a small set of data. What I typically recommend is, for instance, say we're doing file shares, is to make a new folder on a file share, put some files in that, seed some data into that you know you should find. But conversely, also seed some data in there that looks close to what you want to find, but is not a true match, to make sure that's going to be excluded. Because we want to make sure that before we release this search expression to the wild, that we are actually managing this properly and making sure it's going to do what you want it to do and return a set of data. So I always recommend starting something small, opening the scope a little bit at a time. Once your confidence is high, then release it and let it go on the full set of data, because once again, that's going to take more time and obviously going to produce more results for you, but you'll know that your confidence is high on all of that. Next slide, please.
Jeff,
Yes.
just a question. At this stage, if someone is working on this, but they want inputs, or they want to make sure that they've thought of every single consideration or possible consideration, and want to make sure that they're not missing out on anything, who do you typically find works on these types of exercises on
Sure.
the front end?
Good question. So where you're going to get your PII expressions, usually IT is not the ones making this up. Usually there's a business unit. Like if this was a legal search, then we're going to go outside of PII for a second. If we're doing a legal search, usually a legal team is going to provide you with the search terms or the expressions that you want to use. For PII, that could be coming from HR possibly. It could be coming from risk. So there's different groups that could be providing you with this, because I can't imagine IT is going to be the one that's going to have to come up with the actual criteria. They'll be executing it, but not actually creating it.
Great answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. So next slide, please, because this is going to talk about one of the things you just sort of mentioned here, Kim. So it's a nice segue. So this is watch out for false positives. So what is a false positive? A false positive is a match on your keywords, your search expression, your regex that you don't want. So what that means is that you're finding things you should not be finding. And the two most common reasons for that are frequently used words and acronyms. And both, I caution you on doing that, because what that means is that, if you look for the word, obviously this is a stretch, but you look for the word the, you're going to get a lot of hits. So beware of your search terms. Make sure they're specific. If you have something that is generic, then use that near or the and to be able to help qualify it, not just a common word. So just be careful of that. And with acronyms, as you see in the last bullet, an acronym looks great until you realize it's part of another word, and then you're going to get false positives as well. Those false positives, that's what we really want to make sure that we're limiting. And I'll be honest with you, you're going to make up your search expressions, your regex. You're going to refine that expression before you, as I say, release it to the wild. You're going to test that out, and you're going to see that false positives are popping into your results. You're going to want to sift those out, make sure they're not there by refining your search terms, and then trying it again and again and again until you have high confidence of all that. Because our goal on this is to find all true positives, so true matches, and to really mitigate or fully eliminate all false positives. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going into the world of regex. Regex is an interesting little guy because it is its own little programming language, if you want to call it that. It was made decades ago, very powerful. I'll be honest, I'm still learning it myself. I actually joined a forum, which I encourage you to do, that allows you to ask questions, get answers. There's a lot of experts out there. If you want our help with that as well, we could provide that in services. But don't, as I like to say, don't pound your head against the wall because it feels so good when you stop. So go out and get some help. Make sure you find somebody that can help you with this, because regex is extremely powerful, but you need to make sure you use it to its fullest capacity. So some of the four recommendations that I have here, delimiters. So delimiters are very vital to patterns. The reason being is, once again, we're looking for a social security number. We're going to see that on the next slide as we go into this. But if we had a non-delimited value, just 9 consecutive numbers, that's going to return a lot of false positives. You're going to get a lot of things back because 9 numbers is prevalent in a lot of places that you wouldn't expect. There's emails that has the HTML of the email has 9 numbers in it. So be careful of that. The invalid valid values. What I mean by that, you can cater to the rule, to the exception, or both. And you can actually, just because something matches a social security number pattern, doesn't mean that it is actually a match, because there might be an invalid social, which we'll be talking about in a second. Leading trailing is going to allow you to look at the characters immediately prior and following the match, and I'll be showing you why that's important. And then proximity, which I won't have an example of in my next slide, but what it means is that you can actually use words and say, hey, this social security number pattern needs to be next to SSN, for instance, to have it actually be a match. So regex is extremely powerful, but we need to make sure we use it properly. So next slide, please. And I don't mean for this to be a regex learning, but I wanted to give you some ideas of how you can leverage regex and its power and what you can do with it. So once again, this is a social security number regex, and I broke it down into color coordinated things here, or color examples of the different components. So in blue, you're going to see the valid pattern and valid components. So what this is meaning that is, I don't want to just find a 3-2-4 number. Instead, I'm actually qualifying it. So I know what the valid social security numbers that have been issued by the administration are. You're going to notice 77 is the highest number. They have not issued 78 or 79 as socials, nor can a social start with 8 or 9. Those aren't out there yet. So if you come back with a match, this will exclude it because it doesn't match this. You're going to notice on the delimiters in green, I put the explicit hyphen. That character in front is a backslash, which basically says coming next is a literal character of the hyphen. So I could have a hyphen in there because I'm saying I think all socials are hyphen. You could use a period, you could use a space, you could use a slash, any value you want to in there. The red is invalid values. A social can't be, in this example, 1 through 9 successively is not a valid social. None of the components can be made up of all zeros. And the social can't start with 666 for reasons that are obvious. So those are invalid values that will disqualify this. And then lastly, the leading and trailing. What that's doing for you is saying if the character immediately preceding or following this pattern match is either a hyphen or a number, it's part of a larger pattern. I don't want to qualify that as a true positive. It's a false positive. It might look like a social, but it's not. So all of these are extremely important to use these. Once again, I'm going to talk about your delimiters being very, very vital here. Make sure you have those consistent. We typically wouldn't see a social with a hyphen between the first 2 sets of numbers and a period between the next 2 sets. You would imagine that consistency would be maintained throughout. And also those non-delimited values, they're so difficult to actually find a true match on and eliminate false positives. So use those proximities when you can on the regex. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've gone through and he said, well, we have decided how we're going to find the data, but once I find it, what do I want to do with it? Well, you could just simply produce a report and that's it. Maybe that's all you want to do is produce a report on your data and say, this is all I found. Or you could actually go out and classify the data. What I mean by that is applying a physical label to the data itself. So you'll see some examples I have there down below in the bullets, everything from something very fine as a social security number to very coarse or generic as a PII. And you should be able to make up your own labels to be whatever you want. You even notice I have some here called proprietary and privileged. It doesn't have to be a PII label to be applied. This could go outside of PII even doing this classification. But what it's doing is for you is saying, okay, I've identified a message or a file as containing PII. I want to put a label on it. So as you see in that third bullet, proactive heavy lifting. So I'm all about being proactive. I'm not a reactive person. So what this means is that we can go out and assign labels to the data once and be done with it, but then use that label multiple times. So let's say we have 100 terabytes in file shares. and legal comes to you and says, I need to find all PII and I need that in an hour. You're going to look at him or her and say, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. I can't do that in an hour. What this is going to do for you is to be ready for that. So let's say that with that 100 terabytes example, let's say we applied labels that's PII based using whatever criteria you want. And it only actually 100 megabytes of that data is actually labeled PII. Now, if legal comes to you and says, hey, I want to find this in an hour, you're going to say, I can do that because I've already isolated the PII. I am going to run 1,000 times faster, literally, than I did without having the labels assigned. So it's a very important thing to have these labels get through. Now, keep in mind, I know you have a lot of historical data out there. This is not going to be a fast process. This could take weeks. It could take months to get your historical data labeled. But once again, you do it once and then you're done with it. The model, the methodology you should use on labeling is use the last modification date on recent data. So as data has changed, you can reassess it to see maybe it needs a new label or maybe it doesn't. But that way you're making sure that your data is labeled properly. And as the last bullet says, not all data needs to be labeled, right? So you don't have to label everything. So I like to actually, I'm going to pick on files a little bit here because I'm going to make an analogy between files and closets in my house. So, I buy a shirt and I say, that's a great shirt. I never wear it. When am I going to clean that closet out? Probably not till I move, quite honestly. So I'm going to say that your file shares, SharePoint, OneDrive, are all similar to closets. And it's time to clean them out. It's time to get rid of things you no longer need. I mean, I know I'm talking a little bit about rot here, but if it's PII, let's identify that and make sure that we know exactly what we're dealing with for this. All right, next slide, please. So if you're going to report on your PII, just a couple words of caution. First off, you don't have to include the PII match in your reports. The last thing we want to do is propagate or perpetuate those PII values somewhere else. Let's not put them in a report that's for public viewing. If you are going to report on them, mask the data, at least 50% of it, like a social, maybe you only show the last 4. But the main thing is provide enough information to be able to locate the data. So if we're doing a file share search and we found a match on a file, in the report, include the folder where we found it, the file name, the size, the modification date, enough so somebody can actually locate that file and decide what they want to do with it, if they want to manage it manually. If you're going to perform data governance, measure twice, or as I say, 20 times, cut once, make sure you know what you're doing. Once again, the key to all this is be highly confident. Even before you classify, make sure that you have high confidence in your criteria before you start pulling the trigger and assigning those labels and or doing any kind of data governance to it, especially before destructive actions like we have. But the main thing here with the PII, get it off the file shares, get it out of somebody's email. You don't want it in those public places. You need to have that data protected to make sure that it is being governed properly. Next slide. So here we have some nice alliteration where you have plan, process, and protect, the 3 Ps of being proactive, perfect, and prioritizing PII. That's a lot of Ps in there. So make your plan up, determine what that criteria should be, get your process automated so it's repeatable, and then lastly, protect that. Make sure that data is being protected. So once again, I guarantee this will be a very iterative process. You're going to refine your plan over and over again until you get it right. So be patient with that. And automation will be your best friend on this. And I realize it is daunting to think about the amount of data that you have to go through, but you can't afford to do nothing. It is time to do it. There's no better time. Unstructured data is not getting any smaller. It is growing high percentages every year. So once again, start with data that you know, make sure that you feel confident about it, build your criteria and your confidence, and then be willing to adjust as you go. That ends my presentation here, Kim.
Thank you, Jeff. So we are going to open it up for Q&A, and please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we're also monitoring now, but I see some questions already coming through.
Okay.
And so, Jeff, if you're ready, I'm just going to start
Help the
firing them
presenter.
off on you.
I'm good. So, okay.
But in your experience, especially over 2 decades now,
Ouch.
and what is the most requested type of PII?
That would definitely be social security numbers right
Oh,
now.
wow. Okay.
People are just very concerned about that, and any permutation of social security number across different countries, of course. But that thing that uniquely identifies a person, that's most common. That's what I'm seeing. Credit cards are second, actually.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, obviously, when I was in financial services, those were highly, I mean, everybody was concerned about that. And
Absolutely.
especially in a public company, even more so, especially with a broader company. But
Right. I mean, the
in
thing is,
person,
quite honestly, Kim, I mean, if you get your credit card statement and you see something on there is not your charge, you actually
mhm,
have the ability to do something about it.
yep,
Social security numbers, that's a whole different animal because all of a sudden your identity could be gone. So
yep.
that's crucial.
Yeah, yeah, and identity theft is booming. And I
Sadly.
referenced the Osterman research study earlier, but one of the takeaways from that survey, as well as that almost half of organizations don't have any mature practices for compliance or protection for that data. And so that's really concerning. But as you mentioned, starting is the first step.
It is. I mean, I'm going to equate this to like a tree hanging over your house. So do you want to cut it down before it falls? Do you want to deal with the issue after it falls? I personally would want to cut it down before it falls. So
Yeah, yeah,
as opposed to the reactive.
yeah. And as we all know, these types of processes take more than one person or more than one department. So for those on the call so the other question is, um, who should I be involving to start the process
Oh
if
my.
I
Wow,
do not manage, PII directly?
I would definitely get the business units involved because they would hopefully know what they're collecting during their process. If forms are being filled out, what have you. HR, obviously, I would get with them. Risk and security, I would think would also be involved. Legal might also be ones that you want to ask. This is it does take a team to do all this. So it is not something that should be isolated to one group. I would definitely receive input for as many different groups as possible.
That's a great recommendation. So while everyone who is live on this webinar, obviously this webinar will be recorded. So feel free to forward it on to your business units, your legal folks, your IT and HR, as Jeff recommended. So next question, I understand regex is powerful, but I don't have time to learn it. I relate to this so much. I'm obviously
Yes.
not the technical expert here. So what are my options?
Well, I would, once again, I would join a forum. There's some forums out there. And if you need some recommendations on that, please hit me up with an email and I can certainly do that. Because the one I have done, I have pounded with questions, and I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people that want to share their knowledge, which is awesome. So I have taken advantage of that, and they're typically very helpful, not only with answering the question, but explaining what to do and providing me with the ultimate for me as an example. Here's how you would do it. Oh, thank you. So that way I can tear it apart. I mean, obviously at Gimmal here, we can offer services if you want to help with any of that. But yeah, I wouldn't think that you have to be an expert in regex in order to use it. Leverage people around you, because there might be some knowledge even in your own organization. But if not, it's time for Google, quite honestly, because you and find a lot of things very, very quickly.
Great, thank you. So next question, do you recommend assigning labels always being the first step in the PII process, which is a great question because
labels being first. Well, so
okay.
I'm going to sort of talk about a previous webinar that I did. So one of the webinars that I did before is ROT, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So there's two schools of thought on this, right? So if I am doing ROT first, then I could be deleting things that have PII. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Or I'm going to do the opposite. I could label first and then end up deleting it. So once again, like my closet, why would I move everything from my closet to the new house and then throw it away? I would probably to throw it away before I move or as I'm moving. So they both end up with the same results. Personally, I think what I would do is I would go through the labeling process first. I would mark the things, and this is not just PII, but I would mark the things like contracts, invoices, HR, legal, whatever the labels would be on your criteria, mark those. And when it comes time for that rot processing to occur, then you make sure you protect the ones that you've labeled.
Thank you. And so this is a good segue. Another question that came in, is it possible or recommendable to tag files at the time of capture?
Absolutely, yeah. If at the time of capture. So we're talking when a file, if I'm taking this right, when a file is actually modified or when an email is sent, that would be almost like a DLP solution that's going out and making sure that as things arrive, that they're actually labeled. I'm certain there is software that does that, so they could actually interrogate the content and do it live. But the other option is to do it. Now, keep in mind, if you do that, you still have all that historical data that also needs to be labeled. So at some point, you need to have something that can go through that as well. And so not be just concerned about the new, but also the old, sadly.
Thank you. Well, I hope I avoided pronouncing names because I don't want to mispronounce anyone's names, but I hope Jeff's answers fully answered your questions. But if you have any follow-ups or any clarification, obviously, please reach out to us. I'm here, Jeff is here, and our emails are listed on the screen here. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for making time to join us live. Follow us on LinkedIn. Actually, another question, straggler question just came in. Can
Okay.
folders on the Windows server also be labeled?
They might be able to be. I know with our Gimmal Discover software that does the classification labels, we don't label at the folder level, we do it at the file level. But there might be software that does that, but you also have to realize one of the things you could do with labeling is if you know that the folder qualifies, you could actually label the files within it. That way, if the file gets moved, that label goes with it. If you're labeling at the folder level and then the file underneath it gets moved, that label is not going to be associated with it anymore. So that might be a disconnect.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you again, Jeff, for lending your expertise and your time.
My pleasure.
I also just wanted to say happy birthday to you next week because
thank you.
For everybody joining us, thank you again. We hope to see you in a future webinar. And the best way for you to keep posted about upcoming webinars, whether it's with another Gimmal webinar or any one of our partners, we will be at a couple of events coming up in this month and next. So if some of you will be at ARMA InfoCon in Nashville, Tennessee, our team will be on site. So please reach out to us. We would love to see you in person. We will also be at ARMA in Vancouver as well in October and a couple of other events. And so please feel free to keep in touch. And until next time, we will see you soon. Thank you again.